Professor Tarun, Professor Anamika, and Dr. Pandey are all part of the GNLU Center for Entertainment and Sports Law. They are renowned scholars leading in the field, and they have thankfully joined us today for a podcast on the recently introduced National Sports Governance Act. So now, if I would begin actually with the first question, yeah. So, sir, like we just said, based on your work with the GNLU Center for Sports and Entertainment Law and your general experience in researching sports law and governance, what are some things that you consider as certain deficiencies of this act? So, like, what are specifically some crucial aspects of sports governance that the act has left unaddressed?
Saksham, Shaurya, and Jairaj, thank you first of all for the opportunity. I think when with my colleagues, Dr. Pandey and Anamika ma'am, were discussing, the act seems to be extremely, extremely visionary and a very important act that we should be building on. But there are some gaps. I think the vision has to meet a little bit with the reality as well. And there are a few things that we chalked out. Two of them, I think, which are very, very important, which I feel should be discussed. One is the government intervention and control. If you look at the act, generally international bodies look into these things from a very independent perspective, but the act, at least, uh, you know, maybe it's talking about international standards. It's looking into some international best practices as well, but there is a lot of government intervention. You look at the national sports board they want to create, the sports election panel that they want to create, the national sports tribunal that you want to create. There is a lot of government intervention in creating these bodies. That's one. Number two, something which really, really I appreciated that the government has done is the athletes commission, which is I think is what the International Olympic Committee also has. I think Emma Terho, who's a former Finnish Olympian, she heads it. She's the chair of that at the IOC. I think that's a brilliant step that's been taken. But there again, there is no roles, responsibility, or structure that has been put out in the act itself. I will be really looking forward to what the government is going to do, at least in the athletes commission perspective. I think there are some other points which are very necessary where I want to bring in Dr. Niyati and Anamika ma'am to just shed a light on those things.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Saksham, and thank you, Tarun, sir. What I feel is, as you know, and I'll take up from where Sir left, is number one, the act is very visionary. Now, when we say that the act is visionary, which means that it has tried to bring in those aspects which we always wanted from any law that would come in to regulate sports in our country. And when we say sports governance, it has actually hit the nail where we wanted reforms in sports governance. However, what we feel is that it's not the points that have been missed. It's more of the points as to how they will be dealt. In the sense, for example, when we speak of safe sports, um, what I understand from the language in the act is that safe sports primarily would mean protection of women and children. Now, how and in exactly what terms would only entail only women and children in protection? When we speak of safe sports, would it be only women and children? And if yes, how will that happen? We already have Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act that is already applicable in, to sports, wherever the sports is happening. So when you say safe sports, how have you what is the understanding of safe sports is something which is very important, and therefore we'll have to wait as to the implementation of the rules into how is exactly safe sports being maintained and athletes are being protected, and who as to will fall within the category of safe sports. So how is that, how it will be defined in future is something that we are looking forward to. And the other aspect is similarly the code of ethics that we speak of. So, when you say that there would be a code of ethics, whether the code of ethics would be under the act, or every federation would come up with this code of ethics, or the national board will lay down the code of ethics, because in any of these scenarios, it would be very difficult. Because if the national board lays down, it would be third party intervention, as Sir pointed out. If every board frames it, whether it would be in consonance with the international framework that we follow. And even when it happens that are we even ready to implement something which is an international best practices, or will we tailor it and customize it, keeping in mind the needs of our society and our sporting culture? So, good step. We'll have to wait for some time as to how it is implemented. How do we actually deal with these terms? Because we have seen in the past that the parliament has come up with amazing laws, but then implementing those starking principles becomes very overwhelming for us. So whether the groundwork is being prepared or not is something that we'll have to look.
Right. If I may add from my end, first of all, Saksham, thank you, and thank you to Niyati ma'am and Tarun sir for putting these crucial points out there. But I see two important, really important gaps, perhaps that feel more of a missed opportunity than gap. First is inclusivity. Now, if we were to have a bare reading of the Act itself, it nods towards non discrimination, but it really doesn't move the needle when it talks about, or, in terms of addressing the hard realities of your marginalized sections, be it our trans groups, be it our people with disability, or just athletes from underrepresented areas. So, without any clear participatory guideline, without any cogent safeguard in place, inclusivity would perhaps risk as more aspirational and symbolic than being translated into actionable model. The other equally pressing, area which might need more addressing from the Parliament would be the integration of technology. Now, India today is gearing up for mega sporting events where we have ambitions for hosting the 2036 Olympics. And so it becomes a little surprising that the Act is silent on how do we integrate technology in our sporting governance, in our sporting ecosystem. We have section 30, clause 2, subclause C and D, which make a passing reference for utilization of technology, and it talks about data protection, but there is nothing beyond that letter that gives us any real guidance. So while the world is debating variables, it's talking about athlete ownership of data, smart stadiums, AI driven coaches, we have simulation based training centers. The act really misses on talking about any of these aspects. It misses on aligning towards the Olympic AI agenda. It doesn't align back to our IT Act, our data personal data protection act, and therefore it remains to be seen what the government is going to come up with. Is do we get to have a supplementary policy that supports these aspects or not?
Morning, professors. Thank you for that. My name is Shauryaveer, and I'll be going ahead with the next question. India is a land of diverse cultures and traditions and boasts a rich history of indigenous sports that have been played for centuries. Has the Act managed to preserve the balance between globalization and preserving local sporting traditions? If not, what more could have been done in this regard? Please shed some light on this.
I think this is an area which is very close to us, because we truly believe that there needs to be a policy, there needs to be a structure where indigenous sports are given. And look what indigenous sports have done, in the past. Let's take cricket as a sport which started from England. It has become a global phenomenon now. The LA Olympics are going to have cricket there. Look at wrestling, which comes out of India, or kabaddi, which comes out of India, and look, what a global mark they've made. uh, I think the act doesn't really speak about uh, indigenous sport. I think the Khelo Bharat Niti does, for sure. They're talking about indigenous sport. They're talking about bringing Indian knowledge system to sports. So there is a kind of gap between the both of them. I think there should have been some discussion on indigenous sport and how the promotion is going to happen in the act itself. But I think we are hopeful, we are very positive about the fact that the government will look into it, because it has been on their agenda. But the act per se, I couldn't find, or I couldn't interpret any article which talks about indigenous sport and promotion of indigenous sport.
add something.
Yes.
As Sir has rightly pointed out, and we don't know whether indigenous sports having a position in the act would have, would be even thought of. But if, for example, there would have been some mandate in the act that, the boards or the sporting federations that deal with indigenous sports will be promoted, will be given some funding or things like that. However, when you look at the Khelo Bharat Niti, the sports policy that came up just this year, it speaks about those things where it speaks about promoting indigenous sports. At the same time, when you look at the national education policy of 2020, you look about, there is there's a mention of integrating sports in education and making education more sporting, and more playful. Now, the things like this, that when you already have a landmark policy like NEP 2020, when a sports policy is coming in 2025, and at the same time you come up with the governance bill, can a linking or harmonizing these three things would have thought of, or will it happen in future? We don't know. The whole question is, if there would have been some aspect of it, indigenous sports would have been mentioned in the act, it would have been given a lot of focus and impetus to these sports and the athletes involved in these sports and the federations involved in these sports. It looks like as if it was forgotten while the act was being drafted. So therefore we feel that it's a missed opportunity, but I don't think we have missed the bus. We can still catch it, keeping in mind we already have these things in mind, which is reflected in the policies that are down there. Anamika ma'am, if you have to say something about this.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there, ma'am. I think, yeah, of course, ma'am, if you are. Otherwise, I would say, yes, ma'am, I agree with you. I think one more reason for this, I believe, could have been the fact that we don't have any proper federation, any proper regulation for these sports right now. And I think the act was directed more towards having a coherent governance model for systems that are in place. So I feel that's why maybe one of the reasons this was not mentioned in the act. Now, I
Exactly.
think
Oh,
Jairaj will go
no,
ahead and
I'll
answer
add
next.
one more point to it because you said that. It's like as simple as infrastructure in, for these sports. All the modern infrastructure that we are making, do we even consider, any sports related stadium that has been built, or is this being recently built by either municipal corporations or governing bodies? Do you see that it includes indigenous sports? Do they have Kho in there? Do they have Malkam in there? Whether that has been even considered while you have an infrastructure. When you do not have an infrastructure, how do you think that sport would be promoted? Where will athletes play or even opt for it? So I think somewhere or the other, there needs to be a special attention being given by everybody, by legislature and by executive, to promote indigenous sports.
Yes, ma'am. I think the goals for these sports are very different right now. So we
Yeah.
need to focus on other goals for those sports right now, like you correctly said.
Professor Tarun, what are your thoughts on the composition of the National Sports Tribunal? Are there any special features of the NST which set it apart from other tribunals?
I think the most special feature of the tribunal is that it's for sport. And I'll tell you what, I never thought that, in my lifetime, I'm going to see a sports tribunal coming. And I'm pretty glad that the government has taken this step. Uh, and I think it's a very, very important step, very significant step. I think one of the biggest highlights of the entire act. But again, here, Jairaj, I think I have the same reservation which I have with a lot of other things in the act. And I'm going to look at it from two perspectives. One is the composition of the act, right? Sorry, the composition of the tribunal. Now there are three people who are going to be a part of it. We are saying that we want to have international standards coming in. International standards, number one is arbitration, which is the code of arbitration for sport, which is already there. UK has things like sports resolution and all these chambers that are there. Malaysia, I think the Asian arbitration center came out with the rules in 2021 or 23, I don't remember the exact year, where they've come out with sports arbitration rules. So the general international practice is arbitration. But let's take a look at the sports tribunal that we have created. We've got three members, out of which one is going to be either the Chief Justice of India or a judge which is nominated by by the CJI. We've got the secretary from the Ministry of Law and Justice and the secretary from the Department of Sports, Government of India. Now, as Niyati ma'am has also mentioned, and I also mentioned in the opening remarks, international bodies have major reservations about third party intervention. The All India Football Federation had to take the brunt of it when the Supreme Court stepped in. FIFA said we are going to take away, give you sanctions and take away the recognition. I think this is going to be a little bit of problem in the future. Can be. I don't know how how they're going to restructure it. Even if you see how the members are going to be selected, the search committee that they're talking about is again going to be by the central government. Again, external third party intervention. That's one aspect, one problem that I have. The second problem that I have is the section 20 of the act. Now look at section 20. It talks about the exclusions that are there when it comes to the jurisdiction of the tribunal, and every major aspect of sport, whether it's doping, whether it's any kind of thing which is under CAS, under the tribunals of the international federations, are excluded. Then what are we exactly looking at? I think the domain in which this particular tribunal is going to look into, I don't know what is then going to be considered by them, because all the important aspects, you already have international standards or domestic standards, in place. If all of that has already been taken care of, why is the tribunal made, and what kind of significant steps, significant, contribution it's going to do when it comes to dispute resolution? So these two issues have to be really taken care into. I think India, this is a very very important time when India should start promoting sports arbitration. We had two attempts which were made. One was in Ahmedabad, one was the Indian Code of Arbitration for Sport. I think this was way back. Both of them really did not make a mark. There were no rules made, no arbitrators which were taken on board. So I think could we have a tribunal? We can really work on the details of it. But this is the time to really look into sports arbitration and create that kind of expertise there. One more thing, just before we move forward, in the tribunal, we don't have a subject expert. Writing that there's going to be a secretary from the Department of Sport does not make him or her a subject expert. There are bureaucrats. They of course have an understanding of it, but why not have an athlete there, or why not have somebody who has an understanding of sports law, or maybe a renowned lawyer? And we don't have a shortage of them in India. We've got great sports lawyers and administrators there. So I think that we have to relook into the structure and see the significance of this tribunal.
Uh, Dr. Niyati, you have explored accountability in sports product liability. However, concerns with regard to safety and equipment have not been addressed by the new act. How has the new act failed to address this opportunity? What more could have been done to legislate in this regard? Just 1 second before you answer that, Dr. Niyati, I had a question for you, Professor Tarun. So like you said, like we are trying to follow the code of arbitration for sport while creating this tribunal, obviously, like you said, but the way we have gone about it, we've structured it's more of a adversarial code. But then again, like we're seeing currently in the recent Semenya case and more recently the Sereng case, there are problems itself with the model of the arbitration for sport. So do you believe that an adversarial model, as the tribunal is currently imagining, is a better option right now than sports arbitration, at least for India?
Uh, Look, we can have a look. Saksham, at one point of time, we say that our courts don't have that kind of expertise, right? If you're going to go into the same model, how are we then helping the ecosystem? Because the problem still stays. That's one. Number two, the Castor Semenya case that you spoke of is one of those rare cases which has gone to the human rights court, because there was a major issue regarding a human rights violation that's happening. I'm not saying CAS does not have problems. There have been major issues with CAS. That's why we had, in the 90s, they had to go through an absolute overhaul to change their systems because IOC was really intervening into it. My whole process is that when we are saying that international standards are going to be taken care of, and if there is a conflict between domestic systems and international systems, the international system is going to prevail. Why can't we look at it from a sports arbitration perspective and see if all right, let's be a little bit of devil's advocate and try to help the other side. If we are saying that the exclude, we want to really give that those kind of powers to the tribunal, then why do we have such a long list of exclusions? Because there is already an international standard that has been made. You really can't go beyond that. So I think we really have to relook into it. It's a great step. I'm not going to deny the step, but I think again a major deliberation needs to be done when it comes to the sports tribunal.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Nidhi, please, if you would continue. Or would you like us to repeat the
Would you like
question?
me to repeat the
Yeah, if
question?
you could please repeat the question. Yeah.
Right. So you have explored accountability and sports product liability extensively. However, concerns with regard to safety and equipment at large have not been addressed by the new act. How has this new act failed to address this opportunity? What more could have been done to legislate in this regard?
I think, you've asked a very timely question, and I'm glad that you have asked this because primarily product liability or injuries that happen to athletes is something which is um, not a lot discussed in our jurisdiction per se when I speak of. And therefore, I feel that athlete safety, which is something of a first thing in any sporting model, which needs to be looked at, is somewhere or the other is not looked at in India. Uh, we already have Consumer Protection Act very recently that came up, the new Consumer Protection Act of 2019, which actually deals with faulty products and services. However, but when you expect an athlete to rely on Consumer Protection Act is not just discouraging but also impractical. Why I say so is because number one, most athletes are not even aware of their consumer rights, let alone in a position to pursue legal remedies available to them as consumers. Second, we see in sports, and we have all seen in sports, and those who would have played sports would agree to me that the athlete is hardly sometimes, an independent consumer. The equipment or the gear are usually provided through coaches, academies, or federations. So, therefore, a responsibility to be placed under the current system on the athlete alone and not on the federations and organizations is something which I feel is faulty. And the Act does not look into that aspect. While, many federations in India do require certified gear. The real issue is not what happens in cases of where the equipment is faulty or it causes injury. We do not have an oversight authority for testing. We do not have an oversight authority that would recall the products or even for injury tracking. When we speak of the sports, safe sports in the current legislation, as I mentioned earlier, it does not speak of physically securing athletes. It only speaks about women and minor athletes. Therefore, what I've seen is that the understanding of safe sport that has been introduced should be more than mere safeguarding women and children, but should also mean the extent of physical safety of every athlete. Now, when you see internationally, federations already prescribe strict equipment standards. When you see FIFA, it lays down for turf, for example, or when you look for ITF, it would lay down for balls that can be used, or even when you look at the FIH, it lays down for hockey surfaces. Even if you look at the ICC, it lays down for helmets and the protective gear. So every international federation does lay down the equipment standards. But the whole question is, do in India we have compliance to industrial and international standards, number one. Number two, do we have a safety authority that would take care of equipment safety for athletes primarily? Do we have a strict liability regime? No, we do not have a strict liability regime, which means we provide the same protection to a athlete as we provide the protection to a consumer, which should not be the case. They should not be treated at par. Again, we have seen in other countries that they have a injury register for surveillance and for reporting. Do we have that? Do we have mandatory insurance coverages for athletes or not? So these are the things that are missed. Maybe when the governance model is uptight as mandated in the statute, we would see that this happens. But keeping in mind the statute does not provide for these, I think it has felt, somewhere missed a crucial opportunity to protect athletes from injuries that could have been prevented. So the mechanism that is right now is sometimes does not align with global best practices. Therefore, we think that an athlete welfare plus accountability, both of them should go hand in hand. And that is what we've missed.
So just following up on that, what kind of framework do you envision to ensure safety at the grassroots levels for the athlete based on any product or to ensure that the equipment does up to international standards, at least up to a certain standards? What kind of framework, especially at the grassroots levels, can we have in a country such as India, where sports is played by so many people in each and every road of the country?
Yeah. So, when we speak of when you say at the grassroots level, I understand that. But when you say played at the road, now that is something which is absolutely a private affair. So we'll not speak of that. We'll only speak of regulated sport. So, for example, school games or it happening in school or some tournament organized by a federation or a local tournament that is either funded by a federation or funded by a local sports governing authority. That would amount to grassroots level for the purposes of this conversation. Now, when you say what should be done, number one, this is something which, we as a center actually work on is number one, athlete education, that are athletes even aware of the rights that they have. Number two, accountability on coaches and organizers. Do the coaches and the organizers, by any logic, feel accountable or are they made aware of their duties? Number two. Number three, the one who procures the equipments and the instruments or safety protective gears, do they follow the international standards or not? And when I say international standards, standards laid down by international governing sports federations, which are mandatory upon the national sports federations and all the federations that are associated with national federations, the local bodies need to comply with this. So what I feel is when you say grassroots level, what it means is that everybody that is involved in the sporting culture should be number one made aware of, told about their accountability, and thereby not just and this is important for preventing injuries, but after an injury happens, what I feel is that there should be a sports injury register where you register an athlete's injury so that a proper mechanism is then laid out as to who procured the instrument from where, who's the manufacturer, so that you know that, oh, this particular manufacturer is to be held liable. Also, what I feel is that somewhere or the other, when the Indian government is speaking a lot about Make in India, and when we see a lot of gadgets being coming up from our local manufacturing hub, be it Jalandhar or Amritsar and places like these, what I feel is that even impaneling them in our mechanism, for example, if we say BIS mark or the certification marks that we follow in India, if we work with them closely, I think we can prevent a lot of injuries that happen to our athletes. Again, one aspect is insurance of athletes, whether when an athlete goes out to play, only at a certain tournament level that an athlete is provided with an insurance. Can we have a mechanism where even schools have insurance mechanisms for their school team? So if, ideas like these come up, not just you prevent an athlete from having an injury, but even his aftercare and rehabilitation is taken care of after the injury. So what I feel is that sports ecosystem should not only look for product liability, but also the aftercare and rehabilitation. So this is what something which we need to think on the lines of to have a safe sport and athlete welfare working together.
Thank you so much for that answer, ma'am. So like you also mentioned about the safe sports policy, and Professor Anamika, you also mentioned that one of the biggest problems is inclusivity. So, do you think the Act, especially under the safe sports policy, has adequately covered the possible problems of representation of queer athletes in India? This, of course, is like particularly relevant in the conversation about the participation of transgender athletes in sports. So, do you think it is something that the Act has managed to cover, or how can it cover it if not possible?
Okay. So that is such an important question, Saksham. Thank you for raising it. If we were to look towards the National Sports Governance Act of 2025, like I previously mentioned, it does gesture towards inclusivity. Now, if we were to look at Section 6F, it talks about safe sports policy for women, minors, and other classes of persons. Now, on the face of it, on paper, this seems inclusive. But honestly, if you were to ask for my personal view, it feels very, very myopic. It really doesn't put inclusivity at the forefront. It does not spell out how LGBTQ plus athletes, even transgender athletes, are going to be protected? How are they going to be treated? What are going to be the eligibility criteria, their participation, or just about any other check? So, what we're left with would be some kind of a legal and institutional limbo where formally you may be covered under an anti discrimination language, provisionally language, but in practice, you can still very well be excluded by selection committees, by federations, by restrictive medical criteria. So even if you look globally, you rightly say that it is one of the most contentious debates right now. Their, inclusion, their participation. Just thinking of IOC and FINA and the World Athletics, we see that they're constantly revising their policies on transgender athletes and their participation in sports. Now, even their policy experimentation, time and time again, is coming under fire. But at least they're trying. Something is happening on that front. In India, we don't really even have to look west in order to engage in this conversation. We already have some phenomenal grassroots initiatives that are taking place, right? So these grassroots initiatives are backed by our local governments, local bodies, authorities. If I were to give you an example, we can, think of the transgender athletic meet, which happened in 2017 in Kerala, or the all trans football team YOL from Manipur. Now, these are some of clearly indicative examples of how inclusion is possible if there is any will for it, right? So, coming back to your question about, no, the direct answer for it is no, they are not specifically any, provisions that address this, but the answer really lies in safe sports policy. That's actually where the opportunity of all of it lies. So, if it can be drafted with the kind of foresight, if it could certainly talk about, protections not just against abuse, if it could embed, anti-discrimination guarantees, if it could embed fair participation norms for queer athletes, we perhaps would reach a space where, inclusion on field is in fact a reality for India as well. But given we're not there yet, this is going to remain a critical advocacy space. It's going to remain a critical debate for years to come till the parliament actually, addresses it.
The Act mandates the creation of the National Sports Board, which will oversee all sporting federations. Is the NSB a welcome change, or does this compromise the independent functioning of sports federations?
I think my every answer starts with the control and intervention. Look, uh, honestly, do our federations need an oversight? Absolutely, we do. Because there are some specific challenges that Indian federations face, keeping in view the nature of how the system in India works and so on and so forth. And we need an oversight body. When you're saying an independent oversight body, Jairaj, I don't know if the NSB is going to be that independent. What problems have the sporting federations faced till now, right? Let's take an example of a number of them. Generally, let's take the Wrestling Federation of India example. Now, people had a major problem with Wrestling Federation of India because there was a political and bureaucratic intervention in the WFI. Let's, take a look at other, I think the Amateur Boxing Federation of India faced the same kind of issue. The Badminton Federation of India also, if I remember correctly, faced the same kind of issue. We are saying that we need an independent body. Independence from what? Independence from political and bureaucratic approach. The our sports federation really, have faced bad music, because of which our federations have faced bad music. Now, when you're saying we need that kind of oversight, look at the body which has been, which we have now created, the composition of that body, who's going to actually, come out with that body. The central government again. So again, that's again the same thing that has happened before. Where is the change? What is the independence of that body? The whole thing is that if you're talking about international standards, the international standards then have to be taken care of at the fullest. It cannot be like, we want to create an independent structure. That independent structure is to counter all the political and bureaucratic intervention before, but now the body that's going to create that independent structure is also coming out of the central government. Now that's where I think the independence of it can be questioned, but of course I want to stay positive and look forward to that, how they're going to create it and what's going to come out in the end.
If I may add something, um, when we speak of sports governance, what we primarily understand is autonomy of sporting organizations and federations. And their autonomy is primarily important, keeping in mind sport is one of the unifying feature of all the people worldwide. You may be from any country, you may be from any legal system, you may be from any religion, but when you come out to play sports, you follow the regulation of sports. The moment when we say that there is a national sports board which will be governing sporting authorities, or which will be, for example, if you look simply the provision for which has been made, which will be registering national sports federations and thereby determining their legitimacy. What you do is, I understand that you streamline a structure. And I think Tarun sir would concur with me when I say this, because when you want to have or organize, for example, a national level championship, as we try to do to promote Kalari Pet at GNLU, we faced a lot of trouble keeping in mind that there were multiple national federations. And when we tried to do it with one, the other stated that no, you need to do it with us because we are the one that are recognized. I think that problem is being solved. But then the whole question is whether tomorrow, apart from the current something that is that we which we might be highly speculative of, that when a national federation is following the international federation's guidelines, it would get recognized under the national sports board. But then the whole question is, will there not be any further requirement? For example, it needs to be a registered body. Now that we understand, but then more so apart from that, something adding more kind of guidelines that would, if in case do not align to what international federations seek of. So, for example, if there's an international federations that would promote queer, but if in India, I say it is not the case right now, will it not be antithesis to what has been promoted by an international body? So, therefore, one way to look at it is streamlining it. Very good, welcome move. But then, if it is only restricted to streamline, as we have seen in our country, the political interference, the kind of government interference in sports is something that we are very afraid of. It should not, at the end, look like where the highest government officials are now intruding into the sports management or governance of every sporting federation through creation of a national sports body. So that should not be the ultimate result of it. Again, very speculative, but learning from the previous experiences is what we are coming from, and therefore we are very troubled by it.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that. Definitely agree with you. Yeah, if we essentially allow bureaucrats to get back into the federation, it essentially defeats the purpose of the act because we already have that issue. So definitely, one thing like Tarun sir said, I think a very good word to describe the act is visionary. But of course, it introduced a lot of things. But of course, there's a lot to do right now.
Thank you for that answer. I'll move ahead to the next question. Another factor that may exist that may affect existing sporting organizations is their inclusion under the RTI regulations. Due to multiple rounds of amendment of the Act, a public organization such as the BCCI need not come under RTI scrutiny. The determining factor for this is whether the said organization receives government funding. How do you see this relaxation playing out? Does it undermine the accountability of such organizations to the public?
I hope cricket fans don't troll us after what we particularly believe when it comes to RTI and BCCI. Look, I personally believe Shauryaveer, Saksham, and Jairaj. that whenever you're into public function, right? If you're a public functionary, you can be registered in whatever way you are. If you're using public, if you're doing a public function, you're using infrastructure created with the help of the government through public money. I believe that there has to be an oversight, accountability on you. And people can have a different opinion about it. Personally, I feel that BCCI should be under the RTI. There should be checks and balances on BCCI because we've seen in the past they've done a tremendous job. I think it's one of the most celebrated federation around the world. I'm not going to even talk about India. I think it has created that kind of stature for itself. But have we seen problems in the BCCI? Of course we have. We've seen what happened in the IPL scam. We've seen sometimes how things have been taken care of. It needs that kind of it has to look into transparency and accountability. RTI as a mode, I think, is a brilliant work done. And why not? But if you are so clear and you're doing everything properly, there should be no problem. At the end of the day, it's public function that you're doing. It's a national team. It's not a privately run team. And when you're doing something at the public level, I think it's very important to be answerable to the public through the RTI. And I truly believe they should be held accountable. And I think that can only be done when they are under RTI. So there is, for me, it's a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. Nothing against cricket fans or anybody for that matter.
So Shauryaveer is like the biggest cricket fan I know. So
Sorry,
No, I
I'm
agree
really
that there
sorry if
are.
you feel bad about it.
So as a cricket
Cricket
fan, I
fan.
have several issues with the BCCI.
Thank God.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
every cricket fan should have issues with BCCI, and therefore they should want, ultimately it is
There are
cricket which is we like. Yeah.
there are several instances of mismanagement. While the BCCI has done a brilliant job, and there can be no denying that, there have been several instances of mismanagement. Off the top of my head, the way Virat Kohli's ODI captaincy debacle was done with Saurav Ganguly at the helm of the BCCI. So I do agree with you completely there.
No, I think I remember, the whole issue with NADA and the National Anti-Doping Agency came in. There have been major issues of age fraud that have come in, and I'm talking about the best of the best athletes. Another very important aspect, I think, which we were discussing in the morning as well, while we were preparing for the podcast. I think how, at least in cricket, I can speak of how these issues of age fraud have been made very have been taken into, in a very I would not say positive, but in a very funny way, where people say, people have done it. I'm pretty sure I remember there was a few cricketers, I don't want to name them, who were making fun of the fact that, there have been age fraud issues. People have played in under 19 or under 17 team when they were not under 17 or 19 and normalizing it. I think it's absolutely not normal to think of these things as a pass off or something. These are very important issues. I'm glad that the government has come with the age fraud code as well, which I hope will be out there very soon, because that there has been problems with cricket when it comes to governance, mismanagement, transparency, match fixing, spot fixing, doping, age fraud. Now, if each and every federation is looking towards transparency, accountability, and you have the RTI to keep a check on it, why not BCCI?
yes, sir, definitely. We had a chance to talk with Mr. Nandan Kamath a while ago, and this was, I think, the day the age fraud code came out. So,
Right.
like, he's also played a lot of state and national levels. So we're discussing
Absolutely.
about this with him, and he was like, it's very normalized. Like, it's very normalized. So, like, he was like, I could tell you so many players. Obviously, like, he also didn't take names like you. So many players who've done it, and it's fully normalized, especially in cricket. It's something that
Look,
we see.
Saksham, it happening and people have reservations about it is great. When you start celebrating these kind of things by saying that it happens, maine bhi kara hai, it has happened with the other player, I know, and you're sitting at an international platform and making these kind of comments and letting it go as a joke, uncalled for. International athletes should be
Definitely,
very
definitely,
Completely
very
agree with you there, sir.
cautious about making these comments.
definitely.
Completely agree with you there, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had a great discussion now. So as we wrap up this discussion now, so we've explored several critical gaps in the act right now. So thus taking a holistic view of all of these, what would essentially be a sort of a roadmap for the next phase of sports law reform in India? Because as we discussed, the act is definitely visionary, but it has a long way to go. And also looking ahead to the next decade, how do you envision the intersection of technology, governance, and athlete rights shaping the future of sports law in India?
I think you said technology. Anamika ma'am would be the best one. Anamika ma'am, if you can start.
Yeah, so I mean, we've had such a wonderful conversation around the gaps and the loopholes, and therefore it feels absolutely apt to actually talk about the roadmap ahead and what is the next phase of sports law reform in India. And for me, really, it will rest on two pillars. At the end of it, one should be responsible integration of technology, and the other, the holistic, inclusive sports ecosystem. Now, for the latter, like I've already mentioned, it can't simply be that we're importing already contested models. I mean, West is struggling just as much. So we really need more of science-informed, right-based approach in terms of having inclusive models. Uh, and then in terms of technology, when we say why I've said responsible integration, it can't be that we start using 10 different types of technologies without the kind of infrastructural maturity to back it up, without the kind of structures that protect our data, protect our athlete data rights. So on technology, the act right now is still very thin, but we have to move beyond merely mentioning technology in the passing, like we see in Section 30. Instead, we have to bring in a comprehensive legal architecture that governs athlete data rights. It aligns with global standards like the Olympic AI agenda, something that balances innovation with fairness. So we cannot absolutely going ahead, afford to play catch up on these issues as well. Something that we can foresee happening. So if you were to ask for the next decade, I don't see intersection of technology, governance, and athlete rights as three separate conversations, but as one integrated agenda that has to be taken and read together. Ma'am, Niyati ma'am, Tarun sir.
Um, Tarun sir, should I? Okay, okay. And when we speak of, or when we even contemplate about future of sports in our country and what should be the roadmap, we have a lot of answers. But for me, I would always keep the athlete at the center. And when I say athlete, because when in the moment I keep athletes at the center, the sports is taken care of, the governance is taken care of, and everything related to a sports ecosystem is taken care of when you pay a lot of attention to that athlete. So for me, when I say speak of athlete, the first step would be that whether when I invite an athlete even to enter into the realm of sports, whether already existing sporting mechanisms, infrastructure, and things that would be needed, keeping in mind that when he enters into sports, are already taken care of. In the sense, an athlete's trainers, whether his or her trainers are aware of their duties and responsibilities, and can they be held accountable for their actions, number one. Number two, when we speak of the athlete while he's playing, whether athlete is aware of his rights and liabilities or not. And that's where we speak of athlete legal education program. And lastly, when an athlete retires, do you even take use of that athlete or not? You as a sporting ecosystem make use of that athlete or not? Where does that athlete go? Does that athlete join some private company? Does that athlete become a government employee? Or does that athlete is given an opportunity in a structured manner to give back to sport? So there's a concept of sporting ambassadors or an athlete ambassador, where an athlete would go back to their town, to their school, and train other athletes. So the whole question is, you have an Olympian or you have a international winner or an international somebody who has played at an international level, represented India, comes back down and is not just involved in his day-to-day, trying to feed his family, but is already given a role here where he would earn for himself and for his family just by giving back to sports. So when you keep an athlete and the whole life cycle of an athlete is taken care of, I think sporting reforms would automatically follow. So that should be a one-point focused agenda that I feel should govern regulations thereafter.
Uh, I think most of the points are taken care by Anamika ma'am and Niyati ma'am. One area which I have started very recently researching upon, and it has really catched my eye because it has become a international level problem, at least in places like Africa and UK. I think very recently, 23 or 22, even I think the Football Association came out with some kind of data as well, if I remember correctly, is the whole issue of sports trafficking. And because India is becoming that one-stop uh, venue for a lot of at least South Asian countries, African countries, and South American countries, I think this can be a major problem in the coming future. If I remember correctly, I think University of Nottingham has done something about it. They've come out with the report on sports trafficking and how it happens. United Nations is extremely vigilant about it. I think one thing that we have to really look into to counter such a problem is the role of agents, sports agents. I think FIFA has done something really good when it comes to uh, keeping an oversight on the agents at the domestic level. We really need to create, because where Niyati ma'am is saying that training the trainers, using these athletes, I think sports agents play a very important role in India. And when a lot of junior leagues have now started, a lot of minors are going to come in. Their role, responsibility, and oversight has to be something that has to be looked into, because sports trafficking has become a major problem. Africa, I think there is one very important study done by some scholar in Africa. I can't remember the name, and they've said that how the modus operandi functions, what kind of issues that have minor athletes faced, and what kind of like all these minors have got into slavery, prostitution. I think these kind of things, I think the NCRB has to get involved, has to keep a check, because this can be a major problem in the coming future when we are saying that we want to become a sporting superpower. While you want to become a sporting superpower, I think these things, or you need to have a very good hold on. uh, we have problems of trafficking in general, but with this new component of sports coming in, I think tracking it would be a major problem. So I hope we have some kind of oversight, some kind of regulation of sports trafficking, because it can become a major problem in the coming future. Till now, we don't have data to show that.
Also, I think we should add on this point also that we as a team usually discuss, Tarun sir and Anamika ma'am would agree that, when Sir says that the act is visionary, what we understand is that when it speaks of the board and speaks of the governance model, it says that, athletes should be included in decision making. And the whole question is whether even an athlete is, I'm not saying capable of course, athletes are capable of doing anything, but then keeping in mind governance roles, are the athletes or do our athletes need some training to take managerial responsibilities is something that needs to be looked into. So, training an athlete to take up governance and leadership roles is something that needs to be looked into so that they just don't become I don't remember the word for it, where they are, for the name's sake that they are there in the governance body. However, their contribution is absolutely negligible. So they should not be there just as, signifying or fulfilling that criteria that, oh, we have athlete members, we have women members, but then do you actually train them for that or not is something which is very important. So a mechanism for whereby they can contribute to a major extent is something that we need to look into.
I think international models are there, Niyati ma'am, already. We've got at least
Yeah.
365 that the IOC runs,
Yeah.
where we create that leadership in the athletes. Having said that, I think something that the three of us always talk about, uh, copy pasting systems and putting them in India will not work. You need to create an indigenous system, take inspiration from Europe, take inspiration from the US, take inspiration from any nation. Australia, New Zealand have done some really good work, but don't try to copy paste it. It has not worked in India before. It will not work in India in the future as well, because we have our own problems. So I think a good combination of best practices, global best practices, combined with indigenous practices, I think is going to be a major solution.
Yeah, so firstly, like I would say, like for example, like Niyati ma'am talked about like having athletes actually train, and you also said like for example, we can have an athlete as a technical member essentially on a national sports tribunal. That definitely female athletes there because we need the athlete's perspective. But again, we cannot only have an athlete being the governing decision maker because they don't understand the full full bureaucracy and governance. So definitely we can have them in the decision making, and as I said, we can definitely have training, like you said. Also, again, like for example, the reason I just to ask this question with the vision of a decade is essentially because, like you mentioned, we are essentially looking to host the Olympics in 10 years, 11 years, but like essentially a decade. So again, like I said, so ma'am, how ma'am talked about technology and all. I don't think our current athlete data system will be acceptable for several countries' standards. So we definitely need to improve on that. We definitely need to match up to international standards if we one day, at least in the next 10 years, can dream of hosting the Olympics. And again, lastly, most importantly, like Sir said, we definitely cannot copy paste models. Not at all. It's not feasible with our size of the number of athletes we have, and also with the problems we face at the grassroots level. Because, like again, for example, like coming back to ma'am's discussion about sports equipment. Now, that is not a problem you face at the it's not a problem CI level of sports. That's a problem you see more at the grassroots level again. So I just keep coming back to that word that Sir used to describe that visionary. That has a lot of potential, but there's definitely a lot of things we need to work on.
But having said that, we should be all very positive about it. I think it's a very positive step taken. I was
Definitely,
very
sir. I think
happy.
this act is a huge step for Indian sports in the future. Definitely a huge step. We can only hope to improve from here.
Yeah, we behind our name, all of us kind of proudly put sports law, sports law. Now we have a sports law, so I'm really happy.
Right. Thank you for that, Professor. Just to sum things up, I thought that we can do a little exercise where we can go around the meeting and all three of you can just describe the law, the act in itself, as well as this conversation in one sentence.
Wow,
Who'd like to
one
start?
sentence.
One
Uh,
sentence.
The
I was
law,
going to say one word, but then Saksham told me to make it a sentence.
the law or this conversation?
Both, either or.
Okay.
you want to hear good things about yourself, Shauryaveer. That's why you want to have about this conversation. This conversation is brilliant. I'm really glad that students, are pushing these conversations about the act. Uh, I think visionary for sure is going to be a word, but reality check needs to be done. I think we really need to have a reality check.
Okay. I feel the act has touched the pulse. It has identified the areas that need attention. We just see that we hope that the prescription that comes later on actually works and it just cures of all the problems that the current Indian sporting ecosystem is facing. So hopeful and optimistic is my understanding.
Um, I think for me, it would be the conversation itself around it would be holistic. And while the law that has come into place, it is, something that has translated on our books. It is translated in paper. What we really need now is for it to translate on the field. So that would perhaps sum it up.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and thank you to all of you again for this conversation. It has been very illuminating for us, and we'll sure it'll be the same for our viewers. I think we've learned a lot more, not just about the act, but about India's sports vision also for the future. And once again, thank you so much for this. With this, we'll conclude the podcast for today. Thank you so much for taking out your time. And also, we look forward to receiving your article and reading it.
Congratulations to you and your team for the initiative that you do. And
Thank you, ma'am.
definitely, that's the first step. And looking forward to more such interactions. All the best.
Thank you so much for today.